beyond the reaches of our ordinary lives, somewhere far out there yet deep within us, lurk the words, the images, and the sounds of writer-director Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Here, I would like to offer an in-depth, critical analysis of what I consider to be the director's finest work, Cure. To begin, I'd like to jump right into a frame-by-frame breakdown of two separate interrogation scenes, one from David Fincher's Seven and the other from Cure. We'll start with Seven. Here, the progression of the interrogation is dictated specifically by action, and action dictated by shots.
You heard nothing strange. You saw nothing strange.
Progress, here meaning the amount of information provoked from the suspect by the detective, is communicated entirely by shots and the detective's position within each frame.
Who tied it down?
Rather than a prolonged extraction of information, we get a brisk, shot-by-shot assembly of the scene. Juxtaposing images create the illusion of motion, and each image expresses a whole that changes. Consider a panel in a comic. Between each frame, there are undeniable gaps in time. But despite these momentary lapses in continuity, each new frame feeds readers a fresh piece of information that builds off of previous frames and continues to propel the story forward. What we can deduce from this is that time is subordinate to action, and that the progression of time within the scene is deliberately fractured and disproportioned in order to supply the audience with information pertinent to the story. Information is conveyed by action, action is conveyed by juxtaposition, and juxtaposition therefore indirectly measures time. Each shot relies on a subsequent shot to complete an action. Without the subsequent shot, no action can be completed, no information can be conveyed, and therefore no time can pass. And Seven does not favor time. It favors information. The faces we see, for instance, are they real? Are these real, human specimens found in some horrifying hole in hell?
Get this thing off of me! Get this thing off of me!
The images here are so morbid, so fascinating, so intricate that time becomes of little importance to us. The image that will appear next. That's what we want. And that is what bends and fractures and chops up time. Our own willingness to eagerly glimpse piece by piece the spectacle of horror, to be led through the inner labyrinths of disconnected madmen through modern circles of hell, and to experience horror as a bizarre and nightmarish circus of distorted sensation. But theoretically speaking, given that the shots are fragmented for the sake of pointing to specific action and that the camera can be trusted to tell the audience exactly what to think about at any given moment, our perception of the scene is not taken into account. We're not forced to consider our own reaction to or interpretation of the events displayed on screen in order to elicit meaning from the film. Seven, more or less, spells everything out for us, and this gives the audience a very mild amount of possession over the image. Again, because each shot serves to contextualize and clarify previous shots, we are in constant need of subsequent shots to feed us more information until an action is completed and eventually the film reaches its climax and resolution. This editing and narrative technique provides the audience with a cushioned, objective film reality in which no one image contains a fully manipulated sense of danger or surprise, because no one image contains a complete action. How bad do we want to see something happen? How long can the film string us along? How long can we wait? Instead of asking ourselves, what do I find important here in this scene? What can I learn from this shot? We begin to ask of the film, what will I see next? What is going to happen? Therefore, Seven aligns itself more closely with the suspense film, a conventionally structured narrative dictated by cause and effect that, despite its structural predictability and overall outcome, is still capable of severely jarring us with its provocative imagery and shocking juxtaposition. But where we find suspense and frenzy in Seven's ceaseless propulsion forward, we find horror and dread in Cure's calculated, yet uncertain and inescapable paralysis. The 3-minute, 24-second-long interrogation scene in Cure gives us seemingly little to consider while watching. No facial expressions are given precedence, all action is confined to one long take, and the dialogue is sparse and inconclusive. But this, of course, is only in comparison to the more startling and direct narrative approach taken by Seven.
I got a gun in my mouth! The fucking gun was in my throat! Fuck!
In Cure, actions are not splintered down into multiple, self-contained fragments insulated from the larger whole. preceding and subsequent shots are not strung together for the sake of signifying the importance of specific action. Consider again the time gaps between each frame of our comic. If we were to rip open those gaps and let time spill forth, our framed action would no longer be driving specific action, but rather mere possibility. And given the scene's uninterrupted 3-minute-long take, preceded by just a single cut, all we're left with is possibility. It's clear that juxtaposition isn't a tool here used to channel our attention. We're at the mercy of time to evoke action, and because of this, time ceases to behave in the same manner as that of the conventional narrative, dictated by cause and effect, logical motivation and intention. How long can you wait to see something? How long can a scene retain your interest? How long can you hold yourself to think about something? What happens after a while? Does your thought process begin to change? Are you absorbing information differently? Cure imprisons us within the interiority of time, forever subjecting us to the present moment as it unfolds, leaving us to wonder, what could happen next? What do I value here? We're confronted with the same reality as that of the detective, the reality of real life, where action is not separate from character. Action isn't a glance, a facial expression, a gesture, a self-contained fragment that operates as an individual component of a character's cut and assembled structure. Rather, the detective here carries with him at all times his past, present, and future, exemplified by his permanent and ever-changing physical presence within space and time. He leaves behind him at every moment memories and a history that are burned onto the screen before us. Could there be a better setting for a horror film than in time? Is there anything more uncanny than giving sensation to the unseen, unheard, yet unyielding and all-powerful force that eternally drives us to act? The thing which, at bottom, is the source of all human suffering? And how better to contemporarily allegorize and investigate this primal conflict than through a detective fable? Preceding Cure's interrogation scene, we witness two separate murders committed by two seemingly ordinary individuals, and come to understand that there is a strange young man who may, in some way, be orchestrating these killings. Already we know more than the detective, but only enough to put us on edge initially. As the scene plays out, we come to realize that the killer himself has no recollection whatsoever of this strange young man. We're left to wonder, was the stranger real? And like the detective, we're given more than enough time to consider what we already know. A strange young man appeared out of nowhere. He followed the suspect home, he asked odd questions, and in the end, he did something to him. The murder can't be a coincidence. There's clearly a link here. But what? Why is the killer admitting his guilt so willingly? Will the detective catch on? And all the while, we're still stuck in this room without any hope of leaving. How much larger is the room? What's behind us that we can't see? What are the strange noises we hear? The space before us is no longer a set on which actors perform. It's a room and a building in another dimension with other places and voices and things that we're made to be aware of but are not permitted to see. We are in a space and a time, an unfolding present charged with possibility. But given the nature of the conversation between the detective and the killer, the possibility is that of menace, of evil. And as we watch, waiting for something to happen, the screen begins to buzz with fear. As the story develops, we witness murder after murder, seemingly orchestrated but not perpetrated by the same strange man. Mamiya, as he is called, is eventually apprehended and questioned continuously by Takabe the detective, who learns that the killers have all somehow been hypnotized into murderous trance states. But despite this, the murderers and their motives are laid perfectly bare from very early on in the film. The police officer can't put up with his partner anymore and kills him. The female doctor despises men and murders one. And while the rest of the killings aren't fully fleshed out on screen, these two examples make known to us that at bottom there is latent intent behind each and every one of the murders. The intent simply requires a trigger to stir it into action. But as Sakuma the psychiatrist states,
催眠法自体はありふれた技術だ。しかしな、いくら催眠状態に入っているとしても、 その人間の基本的な倫理観は変えることはできない。つまり殺人を悪だと思っている人間に人を殺せというテーマは暗示できないよ。
In the midst of hypnotic trance, these individuals are made completely free from moral and social restriction. Yet they choose to kill. Has social order and restriction therefore been mistaken by these individuals as their own moral sense? Are they truly without morals? Are they evil? Take again the psychiatrist. While he too was hypnotized by Mamiya, he was able to refrain from killing others, opting instead to take his own life. Do the killers have this choice? Do they have any? And how to define evil? In each individual case, the murders are in some way warranted. The doctor, for instance, is convinced of her own inferiority by men. She's made to be vulnerable. And what is vulnerability other than the threat of an outside agent entering inside? At bottom, a fear of death. Men threaten to gain access into her mind and extinguish her existence. She's able to overcome that threat only by murdering them, and therefore subjecting them to the same vulnerability that she herself feels. In Mamiya, she is capable of becoming an empty vessel through which her own personal sense of moral logic is, for once, able to take precedence over social restriction. The police officer, too. He murders a young up-and-comer, far more lively and dedicated than he, who represents his own shortcomings, possible failures, and mortality. Therefore, these aren't thrill killings. They're logically justified practices in hyperbolic self-defense, betraying in each killer an almost primal aversion to death. And why shouldn't these killings be justified? Humans must experience some form of joy in order to live, and the killers are those who have been robbed of that necessary freedom. They've been compelled involuntarily into severing connections with other human beings, and now despise humanity as a whole, all at the hands of their victims. The killers, therefore, cannot be considered evil. They're adhering to instinctual human logic and pushing it through to its bitter end. For what is logic other than a defense mechanism created for the sole intention of disguising and combating death? Death is a finite end, an abrupt severing of ties with the living world, an equation that humanity simply is not capable of overcoming. Logic is a safety precaution used to shield us from the only fact that we know to be true. All that stands in opposition to death is logic. But is this really true? Is this the only solution? Uncovering the answer to this question is Takabe's duty. Despite pleading their guilt with sound minds, the killers still exhibit peculiar behavior. And while the killers' admissions of guilt provide Takabe with very little insight into the possible preventative measures to be taken on behalf of the public, their lingering deviancy from the norm still prompts inquiry into the likelihood of hypnotism. Initially shrugged off by the psychiatrist as a somewhat feasible theory about a grossly underdeveloped field, Takabe's insistence upon hypnosis eventually proves valid. Takabe therefore must uncover and study the inner workings of the human mind. Will the human spirit truly crumple beneath hypnotism? Are we capable of manipulation? Have the morals of the average person decayed this far in the modern world? And is the modern world to blame? The only road Takabe has to the outside world, to humanity as a concept, is he himself. Is he capable of combating hypnosis? Does he have confidence enough in his own moral standing? Does he have thoughts that could push him to kill? And if so, is he strong enough to recognize their evil? If he is capable of answering these questions and responding to them in a morally sound manner, then so is all of humanity. Thus, Takabe visits the far reaches of his own mind and coaxes Mamiya out of hiding. For what is Mamiya but an empty vessel capable of reflecting back to his victims their own fractured psyches? Who is Mamiya to Takabe but a young, listless man free from worry and doubt, no job to attend to, no case to solve, no wife to care for, aloof to struggle? The exact opposite of Takabe, and what Takabe desires above all else. Recall the other killers acting on behalf of deep-seated, unchecked emotion. Do they see Mamiya? Or do they too see abstracted and idealized versions of themselves? Doubles who urge them to kill that which endangers their pride and illusion. What Takabe therefore must discover is whether or not humanity is capable of overcoming itself, confronting and accepting death, and ultimately heeding the will to power amidst the heavy and seductive current of hypnotic resignation. And therein lies Takabe's dilemma. He's no different from the killers. The will to power is a religious commitment to chance, and with Takabe already attempting to traverse the tightrope between work and love, risk factors in quite heavily. At every moment he must succeed where the killers have failed. He must maintain his balance, for he is just as likely to topple as he is to overcome. To fall to one side of the tightrope would mean to kill Mamiya and end his career, freeing himself to focus his attention on caring for his mentally disturbed wife and nursing her back into existence. It too would mean succumbing to the material comforts of the world and sacrificing the greatness and immortality he could achieve through his work. But to fall to the other side would mean to choose work over love and succumb to his fear of domesticity, restraint, moral and personal decay, and resignation to fate, all made manifest through his wife. However, as is illustrated by the film, both paths lead to murder. And as a detective, Takabe's work entails that he protect others and put an end to these senseless killings. Therefore, he must continue with all his might to balance through the hypnotic fog that has left the other killers victims of circumstance and pave for all mankind a path to triumph.
昔どこやらの森の中に
Sacrificing love, work, man, colleague, these are not choices. These are confessions of a dependency on fate, a distrust in humanity, and a deterioration of moral strength. The only cure, then, is for one human to prove that despite circumstance, despite condition, despite fate, we are all, at every moment, capable of determining the outcome of our own lives, hypnotism or no. And if we are to succeed, if Takabe is to succeed, we must alter our thinking. We must resist the urge to succumb to our own pride, our own fear, and instead learn to consider for once ourselves. Not what we want, but what we need. Human beings need joy, to love, to behave totally against all logic. Otherwise, the manic, neurotic side of life seeps in and lays rot. But to let one's guard down, to halt temporarily the struggle for immortality, and to acknowledge the inevitability of death, for even just a moment. This is a terrifying thing to do. Love is illogical, and thus we fear it. It is an admission of defeat, an acknowledgement of our eternal flaw, a smug indifference towards death, and thus it is necessary for our survival. To focus solely on the certainty of death and to rage against it in vain will only draw us closer to it. Love is the joyous, idiotic pleasantness of creation. Work is our frantic urge and race to become immortal, and the cure to our condition hinges upon the balance of both. Work, after all, is not without evolutionary purpose. Man must create, to give form to formlessness, to attempt to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, to, in some small way, stand up to death. Without work, man turns his back upon all of mankind. To work is to create, and creation is an act of giving. Consider Takabe burrowing deep into his psyche, trying to discover why this keeps happening. Creating safety and answers, refusing to topple at every moment, remaining vigilant. He does so for the sake of mankind, to protect others from senseless murder. Consider Kurosawa the filmmaker, giving form and sense to time and leaving behind a creation, an attempt to construct for humanity a monument, a history dedicated to the tragedy and triumph of a man from which we can all learn. To work is to create is to give, and to give is to offer mankind our knowledge and experience, in hopes that it may create for others an opportunity to address their own problems, their own shortcomings, their own failures, their own joys and achievements and dreams. But to build for humanity a temple, a film, a cure from within which they can all find knowledge and solace, there first must be within all work a devotion for and love towards mankind.
ここか。
Otherwise, work only serves an individual and selfish purpose, to protect oneself alone from death, from one's own predicament. This is where the killers fail and where Takabe succeeds. He understands that death cannot be overcome, that killing, working, loving, nothing is capable of defeating it. Death will always be scorned and hated and fought against and rejected. This is why he frees Mamiya from his cell. Joy can only be found in the maw of death, and death cannot be bottled up and compartmentalized and questioned or understood. Therefore, to enlighten, we must make friends of death. By accepting the inevitable, we open ourselves to the illogical. And therein lies the true horror of cure. While providing for us ample opportunity to glean from it all we can, the film too attempts to coax us down from our tightrope and forcibly ease us into the magnetic sleep of the killers. Consider the bright lights, the flames, the running water that we are subjected to that even Takabe doesn't seem to notice. The film itself is attempting to hypnotize us, and it therefore becomes an object to be fearful of. It is a reminder that death awaits, that hypnotism, our predicament, our excuses, a medium, a movie, they're all unavoidable. Life is struggle, and we are capable at any moment of failure. But like Takabe, there is no one and nothing but ourselves preventing us from shaking free the sluggish restraints of fate and failure and destiny. Does Takabe really kill Mamiya? Does he really kill his wife? Does he kill both or neither? Ultimately, it does not matter what he does, but why he might. And in order to accurately assess why, we, like Takabe, must burrow deep within our own brains to determine where our values lie. We can lash out at any moment against our illogical predicament, or we can resign to our fate. But we alone are the only ones capable of ushering forth the new day and awakening from our deep sleep to a dawn of possibility, greeting it with blinded, groggy eyes.